Welcome to the Women Leaders Association podcast, where we believe we go further, faster, and have more fun when we go together. Be sure to tune in each week to hear an empowering message from the world's top women executives, trailblazers, entrepreneurs, and all-around fierce female leaders. I'm your host, Julianne Kirkland, and I will be taking you on a deep dive of each message to equip you with the principles, strategies, and tools you need to start crushing your goals, increasing your impact, creating work-life harmony, and did I mention have more fun? Because when you love what you do it better. The Women Leaders Association is the world's largest women executives association with over 30,000 women in executive and leadership positions who are committed to the development and advancement of women in the corporate arena. If you would like to get involved in a Women Leaders Association chapter, would enjoy daily podcasts, or you desire to become a part of the Women's Mastermind group near you, simply go to womenleaderspodcast.com. Now let's tune in for this incredible message. Hey, welcome back to the Women Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Julianne Kirkland, and I am so excited that Taylor's with us today. Welcome, Taylor.
Thank you so much, Julianne. So great to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. So let's just get into it. Let's go deeper right away. I feel like when we are talking about racial justice and equity, we're not playing around, it needs to be talked about. Conversations need to be had. So let's have it. Taylor, what got you into this in the first place?
Great question. I think really I have been socialized through my parents to really be about the community and taking care of people since I was a kid. My dad was a pastor, and that was what we did. Every day we were out in community doing things to help families that were in need, doing things to help other people be loved, experience love. And as I got older and started really doing research and then started seeing what was happening in the community around me, I started noticing that history is not over. We're still in the process of experiencing all of the systemic oppression, as well as the interpersonal and individualized and internalized oppression that has happened throughout the years of society. And so when I really started studying psychology, I recognized significant differences in how we think and behave and see the world versus how the world is actually treating people. I recognized that there were perceptions that we miss because we don't really look at individual communities and how communities have been marginalized and what their stories are before we start assuming what's normal behavior and what's abnormal behavior and things of that nature. And then I had some really unfortunate experiences of seeing racism happen firsthand and experiencing it firsthand throughout my life, but then seeing it at a level of police brutality firsthand, losing family members and friends who have been killed by police. And then really in my master's degree, really working on understanding what racial microaggression and discrimination does to students in higher education. And as a professor at the time, it was my goal to be able to make a difference on the campus and how Black and Brown students were treated and how they experienced the world so that they could actually continue to pursue their dreams, pursue their goals, and be able to be thriving in the society around them. And so I did that research and it focused on racial microaggressions. And at the time, nobody knew what that was. It was not a buzzword. It was not a thing that people talked about very often. You didn't see DEI or DI or any of it really talked about very often. People were just starting to work on diversity initiatives and what does it mean for people to be different. And so I was invited to start creating some leadership tracks for workshops for faculty and staff to be able to learn more about what does this look like? What does this mean? What do we mean by microaggression? What do we mean by, the subtle things that teach people that they're not cared for, not valued in community? And so I started doing that work from that level, from a leadership in workshop training type of space. And then started getting asked to do that work out in community on training and consulting. And then eventually, after making some U.S. history as the youngest Black woman tenured in the country, recognizing that that work and that information has been gatekept in certain spaces, right? Academic institutions were talking about it, and our social psych classes or our general psych classes or our Black psych classes. They were talked about in certain types of studies, Black studies and Latin American studies and other places, but it wasn't being talked about out at large. It wasn't being talked about in corporations. It wasn't being talked about in community spaces, and certainly not enough within our systems. And so I made the big transition from coming from the academic institution as a professor and coming into a nonprofit organization where I could take that same information, build those same type of curriculums, but now take it to places that had the opportunity to make policy change. So now I bring that training to legal spaces and train judges and others, taking it to health spaces. I just trained, the Hamilton County Public Health Department and said, we need to talk about this at a level where we're making decisions for the community's health and recognizing the social determinants of health, and that oppression is one of them. And then, focusing on places like housing and education spaces. So now I still train at colleges and universities or in school districts and other places that really need the opportunity to learn how to make policy changes that then affect their practices, procedures, and norms and culture within our community spaces, and not just teaching students who have to be able to afford the class, who have to be able to have the credit hours left in the program and have the time to do the homework and, all of those things.
Oh, so good. And I have seen just in what I do and being involved in so many different workspaces and entrepreneurs and all the things is, and even I have 6 children and having them, from going into a sophomore in high school all the way down to 4th graders, right? And it's like, man, it's one thing, like you were saying, to have these buzzwords out there, right? And it's like, okay, well, we have our diversity program out, check, right? And then it's another to like actually do the things, right? Like actually learn it and bring it in kind of into that core level of who we are as human beings. And like, okay, now let's really, really, really make a difference and not just word vomit that we're making a difference, right? And I love that. I love that you're getting involved on all those levels because, seeing my younger kids in school and just how like mean elementary school kids can be, even when race isn't a part of it, right? Just like stupid stuff, like your backpack, right? Just stupid stuff. And it's like, it's still happening. What? And that's the thing, like we can sit there and we can have our kids go through classes, right? But are their parents understanding, right? Like what's the rest of the atmosphere that they live in on a daily basis? What is that doing as well? And that's when you're talking about the culture of the community, like that's it. Like we have to be in all of it, right? To really start to truly make a difference. I love
Absolutely. It's really about getting down to the basic level of respect and responsibility for the entire community. To say, I'm responsible for you, you're responsible for me, we're responsible to take care of one another. And as a community, we have to hold those values true to ourselves. Otherwise, we'll just be a space where there's a lot of people and a lot of turmoil. And that's what we're seeing today. Like you said, it's not something that you have to teach children to be mean. It's something that kind of comes very naturally to them to find differences and be able to point them out in a negative way. And then when you add on the layers of information that they're soaking up from what's in the media to what's on the news to what's talked about at the dinner table to what's talked about at the playground or in other spaces that they occupy, there's so much messaging that socializes us to hone in on these differences and have negative attitudes towards people that are different than us. And we have to do our due diligence to counteract those narratives.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, even in my own home with my own children and how I mean, I have a set of quadruplets. And so like I had 4 at one time, they grew up in the same womb. They ate the same food and they're different. They're different. They have different love languages. Like they receive love differently and they show love differently. And it's like, okay, that's my role is understanding that about, and that's what I'm saying is like, yes, so take that very simple example of in your own home and expand it out.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's so necessary to be able to show love in different ways to the people in the way that they need it.
Yeah.
And that's what equity is all about. It's not about giving everybody the same thing. That's equality. And that
Right.
doesn't work. If I give everybody the same plate of food, somebody's going to be lactose intolerant, somebody's going to be vegan, and someone's vegetarian, and somebody's diabetic, and everybody has their own needs. But equity is about accommodating for the historical oppression, accommodating for what has happened to you,
Mhm.
and considering the many layers of you that exist. I mean,
Right.
everybody is so much more. Like you said, we're all different. You could all be, the same colored skin or the same religion or the same, economic experience, but each person has other layers to them that
Yeah.
make them who they are. And so
Yeah.
that intersectionality is necessary. And that's why, doing this work with YWCA has been so critical because we look at that intersectionality. Our mission is about eliminating racism and empowering women and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all because we
Yeah.
have to see the whole person in order to serve the whole person.
Yeah.
And too often we like to pick pieces of people that we're willing to accept or willing to love on or willing to show support to or willing to meet the needs of without considering everything that's necessary. And then that equity piece has to go beyond just, accommodations for the problems that have been caused over the years and the barriers that exist, but into some kind of accountability. And that's the
Right.
justice piece. We got to hold our community accountable for the barriers that exist. And then eventually, like, let's get rid of them. Let's dismantle those barriers. Let's knock them down. Let's start fresh. Let's start new. Let's imagine new, not necessarily reimagine or reform, but let's imagine new. What
Right.
does it look like for a community to be truly liberated? What does it look like for people not to have barriers based on this, and that? What does it look like for a community to really be able to be loved in the way that they receive love?
Yeah. And I think it's so important, one, you mentioned dignity, and that's huge. I did a podcast with April Johnson several episodes ago. And she works for a company called Dignify, I think. But that's where they honed in is that every single human being has dignity and needs to be, reacted to in dignity,
Yeah.
right? And that's so true. And again, just we as humans tend to make things so super complicated
Oh, yes.
and we overthink many things, right? And at the end of the day, yes, we are multifaceted, but like we can allow ourselves to get back to what you were saying of like just like imagine, let's be curious, right?
Yeah.
And I talk to my clients about that all the time, like, well, what if, like the limiting belief that they may be holding, right? That they could never be a published author. Who said that? Like, and why you believe in it? Like, let's explore for a moment. What if? Right.
Yeah.
And just allowing people to remain curious and you having created these teachings and programs for them to take that curiosity and then go, okay, so now if I layer this part into it, right? And then
Mhm.
and then I go here and that they start to see a pathway through.
Yes.
I love that.
And that's necessary. Like we need the tools to be able to forge that pathway.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, those tools are not always available in the places that we thought they would be, right? We're seeing education be challenged where educational spaces where you would think that teaching about history and teaching about community and teaching about culture would be a norm and would be accepted, that people are rejecting those
Mhm.
ideas and rejecting some of that information and rejecting some of those facts. We're seeing books being banned where people are not allowed to be curious anymore
Right.
because those ideas in the books or those concepts or those realities of people's experiences are being, looked down upon
Right.
or not valued by others in community. So it's important to build those tools and provide those tools and be a resource so that
Yes.
folks have something to fall back on and somewhere to go when they need
Right.
that information. And so I love building those tools. Curriculum building is something that I enjoy doing. And
Yeah.
so I've created several free opportunities for people to be able to engage, like our 21-day racial justice challenge that we have, where people can walk through 21 days of information, podcasts, articles, videos, and be able to dive deeper into some of these topics and how racial justice will relate to, things like gun violence or things
Yeah.
like women's financial empowerment or being a caregiver or
Mhm.
transportation and all of
Right.
these different spaces that we as human beings occupy. And then we
Mhm.
also created like a youth version of the challenge for families, middle school age and high school age families to be able to walk through the same type of information together, but from a youth perspective, from teenagers telling the stories instead of somebody's long podcast or long article, for them to be able to see it in a brief and more
Absolutely.
compatible way that works
Right.
with their identity and attention span and all of those things. And then we offer other free opportunities throughout the year. We're doing like a race and psychology class that's like an 8-week college level course that I've created that's free. No homework, no tests, just hard work, where people
Yeah.
can be able to come and have dialogue with other community members across the country. And then there's the trainings where we say, okay, let's take an organization that really is committed to investing in their own change and investing in their culture, and let's bring these ideas to the forefront in ways that are customized to their experience, that we can really be able to forge a way to change policies or change practices and procedures.
Oh, that's so good and it's so needed. And I think just in general, as bold as it is to make that statement, is that really I think that the spirit of offense has prevented so many people from pursuing these kind
Yes,
of avenues, right? It's like you may be curious and you want to know more, but like me as a white woman, if I was the example, right? Like am I going to be framed some kind of way, right? Because I offend somebody because I want to, like, I'm genuinely curious and I want to have a conversation. You know what I mean? And it's like, no, that's what we want to encourage is to
it
have
is.
these open conversations and that like let's take away this spirit of offense that anything is going to offend people and blow you up and get you canceled and all this. And like
Yes.
let's really get in there and learn and help each other.
That's the reality. And I get so upset sometimes when I see people um, use that offense to push people out instead of calling people out to call them in. The whole purpose of us addressing the issues and being willing to have these conversations is so that people learn. And you can't learn in a space where you're not able to make mistakes. I mean, did you not
So
watch Magic
true.
School Bus?
So
Like
true.
Miss Frizzle told you on Magic School Bus
Right.
exactly what it is. You should be willing to get messy and make mistakes, and that should be okay. In order for you to learn, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And I tell people, there's this aspect of being able to be consistent. If people are working to learn, working to understand, curious, want to be connected, want to make a change, then those people usually are not treated as if they've, made some kind of major faux pas, right? If they do make a mistake, they apologize and they keep going and they
Right.
keep growing, and that's okay. I think also there's this idea that um, I'm going to be framed a certain way. And so people tend to hold on to a guilt that's not theirs,
Right.
right? Where I tell people all the time, in the court of law, if you're guilty, that means you did it, right?
Right.
I mean, it, although we know that there are people who are charged with guilty but never actually did it, when we talk about what guilty is supposed to mean, it's supposed to
Right.
mean that you actually engaged in that harmful behavior. And
Right.
if you did, apologize,
Right.
apologize, and don't do it again. And, and when you do that, you won't have
Right.
any more guilt and you won't have
Right.
any more problems. But what I think people don't realize is oftentimes they take on shame, and it's an
Hmm.
illusion. It's this
Yes.
idea that I don't know what people are going to think of me, and
Mhm.
I'm concerned that they're going to make these assumptions about me before the assumption has been made or before the thought actually has occurred. And
Yeah.
so sometimes we hold on to this feeling of shame because we're afraid of the unknown. We're
Mhm.
afraid to walk into that space that may be unprecedented for us or something that we've never really dived into before. And
Right.
we're not sure how we're going to be received or how we'll be reacted to. And so my thing is that we have to learn as people to respond instead of react. We
Right.
have to learn how to hear people out, try to understand where they're coming from, even when we disagree. And if we understand what led them to that behavior, what led them to that thought, we might be able to have some very fruitful conversation that leads to growth on both ends, as opposed to just assuming that somebody's the bad guy and treating
Right.
them in a way that won't allow them to grow.
Right. It's so true. And I love that. And again, back to the boldness of saying general, but like offense and shame, absolutely. They do go hand in hand. And you said you grew up as a PK, a pastor's kid, and I mean that goes back to biblical times, right? Right.
Yeah,
That was one of the very first thing that entered the garden was the sense of shame.
right.
And that's a tactic used across the board to make
Absolutely.
people feel some kind of way, right? And so it's just it is so powerful and it keeps so many people stuck. And again, once we as a culture, as a society really go, you know what, can we be done with it? Like let's rise up and really work together to hold dignity for ourselves, for
Yeah.
other people. Oh, look, Zoom, it gave us a thumbs up. Sure did. It agrees. But that really is when the tide starts to change.
Absolutely. And same with that reference. If we go back to the Bible times, what we were instructed to do was to love each other.
Mhm.
You're instructed to love your neighbor as yourself, not love your neighbor if they agreed with you, not love your
Right.
neighbor if they had the same values as you or the same background as you. It's love your neighbor as yourself. And I think we find a root problem that a lot of people don't love
You're
themselves.
so right.
And when you have, the world at your back and all of the things happening in society around you, and you haven't learned how to receive the love of God or the love of self, then
Right.
you tend to be more susceptible to that offense, to that shame, and to
Right.
those other things.
Right. It's so true. Oh, this is so we could talk for hours. Um, Taylor, what are some of these like access points to these free resources? Because I know people are listening and they're like, I want to take that. I want to do that walkthrough. How can people start to connect with you?
Absolutely. Well, you can find all of those free resources and access to those trainings and things at www.ywcacincinnati.org. And when you go to that website, you'll be able to go to our racial justice and advocacy page, see what we do, and tap into some of the opportunities that are upcoming and ongoing. And then, of course, if you want to stay tuned with me and what I've got going on, because I do other things out in the community, you can follow me on LinkedIn. Taylor Curtis is my name. You also can follow me on Instagram, Twix_sweetheart, where you'll get lots of the other aspects of this work through music, through comedy, through self-care and holistic self-care and other avenues that I love to bring the same type of information to the community.
Oh, I love it. Taylor's awesome. All right, what is one last piece of advice that you would give to the woman listening right now that's like having that stirring inside of her right now that's like I want to do better. I want to learn more. I want to help more. I want to be involved more. Like what's her next step?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people disregard when they talk about the steps of liberation is the connection to our spirit. When I talked to Bishop Calvin Woods, who was at the forefront of the civil rights movement, I got to spend some time with him earlier this year. He's 90 years old. And one of the things he said is that every part of liberation movement has been a spirit-led movement. So if you're not in touch with your spirit and you're not connecting your spirit to the creator and the authority that has been put into place for you, then a lot of times you're going to miss out on pieces that are critical into having that change, having that evolution of self, being able to love yourself, being able to receive love, and being able to see other people for the fullness of who they are. So I think that's the first step. And I think the second step is to really take the time to care for you, understand you, learn who you are, learn where you sit in society.
Mm.
Where have you had advantages in the world? Where have you had disadvantages? Where can you leverage the advantages that you've had and use your voice to uplift someone else? And where do you need support so that you can reach out and connect into other people? And then be a part of community. When you start building in community, you'll find more resources, you'll find more connections, you'll find more next steps, you'll find ways to be fortified, even when those steps are hard, because it's not an easy journey.
Right.
And so I think those are our three main things that folks can do that will allow them to dive deeper into their journey of self and deeper into unpacking ways where we've been complicit to the problem and unpacking ways that we can be the solution.
Oh, so good. Taylor, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. We will be sure to put all of her links in the show notes so that y'all have easy clicking access to be able to get into Taylor's world and see all the goodness that she is up to. Taylor, again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. All right, ladies, if there's anything else that you are looking for, remember, visit womenleaderspodcast.com and we'll be connected there. Have a good one. Bye for now.